Anyway, this is a video about the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, being fined for having a party during lockdown. So the police made that announcement just a couple of days ago, which is obviously deeply embarrassing. But Boris Johnson has got a pachydermis hide and is shameless. So he thinks he can probably brass it out. So I don't want to go too much into the particulars of it. And he was supposedly ambushed with a birthday cake and a chorus of Downing Street staffers singing him happy birthday. It was all organised by his at the time fiancée Carrie Symonds, and he was just there for a few minutes. He said hello Laura Jane, he'd visited a girls' school earlier that day. That took several hours out of his day, and he didn't regard it as being any sort of soiree, any social gathering. There are other things like there was the so-called work event which took place in the garden of Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street's official residence, in May 2021. If I recall, there've been various other parties in and around Downing Street. Remember, it's just off Whitehall, the street which is a synecdoche for the British civil service. Now, most of those he didn't attend, but people under him did. There was that Christmas 2020 party and so on, over which his press secretary, Allegra Stratton, resigned, and she didn't even attend said party. She was pressured to go simply because she was laughing about it during a dry run for a press conference. So obviously somebody had it in for her because that was filmed, and she said, is that camera on? And had that not been on, not been kept, she would have been all right. Probably Dominic Cummings who leaked it. But anyway, this all came out in the wash in January 2022, so earlier this year, that this sort of thing had been going on. And Boris Johnson, how was he going to get out of it? So he said, well, the police will investigate, mustn't jump the gun. Senior civil servant Sue Gray was tasked with investigating. Now, presumably he selected her on the basis that she'd write something anodyne, she's a Mandarin, she speaks Mandarin, as it were. She'll be like Lord Butler of Brockwell, whom Tony Blair entrusted with writing a report on the use of secret intelligence with regard to the decision to liberate Iraq in 2003, and so on, thinking, well, I know this person's personality. This is an individual who doesn't like to rock the boat, who avoid controversy, who is very deferential to his or her political masters. Anyway, I could be mistaken. And indeed, one of the civil servants and ethics chiefs got her knuckles rapped for breaking lockdown as well. So Prime Minister Alexander Boris Johnson has been caught lying through his teeth again and again, that there was no lockdown party, that all the rules were adhered to at all times and things like that. And of course in January it was put to him, if the police choose to fine you, will you now commit to resign? And despite having averred that he would resign in the eventuality that the police chose to fine him, he has not tendered his resignation to Her Britannic Majesty. Now, he could have challenged this fine in court, because the police are not a court of law, and if he'd won his case in court, he wouldn't have to pay a penny fine. All right, he's in the clear. However, if you go to court and you lose, you've got to pay the fine plus a surcharge, and you get a criminal record. So it's a more high-risk strategy. And I did hear some Downing Street insider saying a couple of months ago that if Boris is fined, that he will go. But he hasn't gone so far. And the pressure's not intense. He thinks that he can brass it out. And it's obviously very bad news for the Conservatives with the local election happening 3 weeks today. What's the other relevant news to all this? Now, Rishi Sunak, his Chancellor Exchequer, he was fined as well. Notably, the police haven't disclosed how much the fine is. £10,000 is the maximum fine. So if it was a derisory amount, if it was a fiver, then I suppose public opinion would be incensed. I'm not sure why they haven't disclosed the scale of the fine. I believe that they usually do. But both Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have apologised. Their penitence doesn't seem terribly genuine. Johnson doesn't really make a credible impression of contrition, and he's had to go on a world tour of apologies. He's often quipped himself. So about this June 2020 party for Boris Johnson, when lockdown was still on, when tens of thousands of people had died of coronavirus in the United Kingdom, and grandparents couldn't see their children. You, as a dying relative of yours, you couldn't go and hug him or her for one last time. Funerals could only be attended by 6 people. When we finally allowed weddings again, they had very limited guest lists. children to get to go to school in person, and on and on and on. And it was taking a big toll on people's mental and physical health, people who are terribly isolated. So there are up to a dozen more gatherings being investigated by the police. Now, the police may determine that some of them really were work events, and there'll be no case to answer, but we're yet to see. So there's a sort of drum roll of sleeves, which is really not looking good. So I don't think Boris Johnson's days are quite numbered. It depends on a number of things. It hangs partly on how badly these local elections go for the Conservative Unionist Party on the 5th of May, because it's the first Monday of May. There are always local elections in many parts of the United Kingdom, some boroughs, some counties. Some will happen this year, some happen the previous year, some will happen the next year. So 12 years into a government, they would be quite bad. Moreover, it's halfway through this parliamentary term. But remember, these are local council elections, they're not parliamentary elections. So if they're somewhat bad, he can stay. If they are cataclysmic for him, they will go. Remember, if 54 Conservative MPs send a letter to the chairman of the 1922 committee of the Conservative Party, that will force a leadership challenge, well, a vote of confidence. If Boris Johnson wins that vote of confidence, he's still leader of the party and therefore Prime Minister. If he loses that vote of confidence, he's out as leader of the party. He'll stay as Prime Minister until such time as the Conservative Unionist Party can elect a leader to replace him. But remember, if he loses the vote of confidence, he's not allowed to seek the leadership himself. Now, we don't know how many of those letters went in to the chairman of the 1922 committee in January 2022. All we know it was under 54. Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, confirmed he had received some. That's all he'd say. He was very cagey. That could be 1, it could be 53. We simply know it's not 54. And that number 54 that's 15% of Conservative MPs. So the other parties have tried to cause the maximum possible embarrassment for Boris Johnson, but I think he's grown accustomed to this. He doesn't find it excruciating. Sir Keir Starmer, who's the leader of the Labour Party, that's Her Majesty's most loyal opposition, has demanded that Boris Johnson tender his resignation to Her Gracious Majesty, but Bojo was breaking his previous vow. Well, no surprise there. He's got form on that one. So Red Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, likewise, Ian Blackford, who's the SNP's Westminster leader, has added to his voice to this growing chorus for the Prime Minister to step down. So, yeah, it's middle-of-the-road opinion, obviously, is very against him, that he's irresponsible, that he's not a man of his word, and so on. He was making the rules that he wouldn't obey himself. He wasn't leading by example. The Ukraine situation knocked this off the front pages for a while, but it's coming back again. People might get slightly bored of Ukraine, but we might get slightly bored of the whole lockdown party issue. It's also bad for Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. If you're not from the United Kingdom, you won't realise that Chancellor of the Exchequer is the finance minister. That's what any other country would call his position. He's in charge of the Treasury or the Ministry of Finance in any other country. So Rishi Sunak was seen as the crown prince by many people. He was waiting in the wings, and if Boris Johnson was forced out as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak had a very good chance to become PM himself. Below the Prime Minister, there are 3 great officers of state: Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, that's one job, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Home Secretary. So most Prime Ministers have been one of those 3 offices. Some have held 2 of those 3 offices. One of them, James Callaghan, held all 3 of those offices before going on to become Prime Minister. But Rishi Sunak is tainted because he's been fined as well. He's paid that fine. There was also kerfuffle around his wife's non-domiciled tax status. She owns £700 million of shares in her father's IT company, and she paid £30,000 per annum for non-dom status. That's perfectly lawful, but it certainly doesn't look good at a time when the Chancellor Exchequer has been obliged to raise national insurance. It's rather a hair shirt budget. It had to be, because he was dishing out the cash with gay abandon in 2020 and 2021. That was the only way to keep the show on the road economically, and now it's going to be paid for at the time of rising inflation when oil and gas prices are going up. But remember, all goods and services you buy are oil and gas. Somewhere along the line, whatever is this cotton, that was oil powering the tractor which gathered it, and the factory actually turned it into an item. Well, that was powered by electricity. That's probably burning oil, gas, or coal somewhere along the line. Then it's going to be transported by truck, train, or ship. That's oil and gas is used for that. Or indeed in the shop, the lights keeping on in the shop, You using the computer, that's electricity, probably oil, gas, and coal. All right, there are some renewables and there is some nuclear energy could be powering this, but most energy usage in the world is oil, gas, or coal. You speaking on the phone to somebody in an office, that's oil, gas, and coal generating electricity for that office, for the electricity which charges your phone, your computer, all the rest of it. So that's why, directly or indirectly, we're all going to be paying more for everything because of the Ukraine conflict and the way that's driven up the price for hydrocarbons.